opportunity. If there's anything that you would like to see changed or any questions or concerns that you might have, that you have an opportunity to address them. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Polly. And we've got the presentation on the screen.
Thank you, Essence, and many, many thanks to the charter work group that has been working diligently for what seems like a lifetime, probably. As you may recall, we started this back in October of 2020. So it's been almost a year of learning and discerning and reflecting that's resulted in a draft charter. You have seen parts of it or had opportunity to see parts of it over the course of this past year. So here's the process that we have. We have this work group that has been a great, loyal, diehard group of people. We presented some structural options to the general membership back in January, which was intended to guide our work and would give us the framework for all the pieces and parts and how that structure would work. We came back to the general membership a couple times, asking about specific sections and new ideas we had. One was the independent review team, or the IRT. We talked about membership categories, committees, the roles of the lead agency, the HARA, and the new diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. And we talked about those in a couple different ways, and you had opportunities to respond to surveys afterwards, or we've always put out my email if any questions or comments. So thanks to those of you who have participated and given input and taken the time to read it and sent me ideas. So hopefully this is a culmination of those ideas. I want to also start by saying that it's not going to be perfect. It's a big document. It's a complicated document. All the pieces are interrelated. And so we may have missed some key connection. We may have created something that we think will work that turns out not to work for you all. So you'll have to live with this document. You're required by HUD to look at it and amend it every year anyway, and you'll certainly want to do that. But you will find as you work with it, what's good about it and what needs to be tweaked. So hopefully it's at least a good foundational document and a good start, and accomplishes some of these goals that we have. So you're right, the next slide would be perfect. So the whole idea was to take the process that you want and the structure that you want that's going to work best for our community to meet the mission. And you had some bylaws from 2018, and you had sort of a new charter in 2019, and those two documents weren't complete and they were a little bit inconsistent with each other, and you just wanted to kind of get the whole thing on paper and codify all of your thoughts and processes. So that's what we've tried to do, and to communicate to this big collaborative of changing participants sometimes, you know, when they step in, where they're at and how it's working. So that was one of the big goals. We had a couple other goals, which are on the next slide, which is getting our ducks in a row. So we wanted to maximize the opportunities for input and make sure everybody who has a passion for this work has an opportunity. We wanted some objectivity. We wanted to make sure decision-making was based on evidence and data. We wanted certainly to facilitate collaboration. Remember that the whole point is to paying attention to community needs and therefore planning and implementing strategies. Because it's a big collaboration and there's a lot of money at stake, we also wanted to minimize conflicts of interest and minimize confusion. And we want everyone who chooses to be a member, as long as they have that passion, but to also commit to a code of conduct. We also want to make sure in the charter that we wrote that the processes would be fair, transparent, and consistent, and of course compliant with funding requirements, but also be flexible, and that the structure would be flexible so that we're doing work the way we think it should be done for the people in our community, even if our funders change. So we'll comply with the funders as we have them, but if there are other things we need to do, then hopefully the charter has captured those. All right. Any questions on the process or where we're at today? Well, I'm going to what the idea of today, I should have said, is we'll summarize the primary changes and then they'll go article by article and take questions and comments for each article. So if you could hold your questions till we get to that article, that'd be great. And then we can try to go through it in as effective and efficient way as we can. So we did create some mechanisms to try to accomplish those goals that I just reviewed, along with our diversity, equity, and inclusion commitment. So the way committees are structured, the way votes are taken, the way the governance council is structured, hopefully is embodied in all of these goals and commitments. So we did clarify the roles and responsibilities for members, for committees, for an independent review team, which is new, for the governance council, for collaborative applicant, should we choose one that's separate, for lead agency, or what we're proposing to call an infrastructure organization, for the HMIS administrator, and for the HARA. So we also revised the participation standards a little bit to talk about what's a good standing and what the voting privileges are and what it takes to be a member in good standing and vote. And we created an RFP process and timeline with a memorandum of agreement requirement for the contracted entities. So we'll go through those, but there are sections in the charter that deal with all of those. All right, I'm ready for the next slide, I think. So if you have the charter was sent out, so if you have it, we're going to just go through it. So the first article is the purpose. Any questions or comments on the purpose? I don't see any hands raised, but I don't know if I can see everybody. So
Polly, let me just help here. If you have a question or concern, if you could raise your hand or put it in the chat, or just come off mute. We're a small enough group that you could just jump in.
And if I miss you, please just interrupt me. I don't want to talk over anybody. So I didn't think there'd be too much on the purpose, but the idea here is not to repeat all the language in the charter, but we're going article by article, assuming you have the document with you. Okay. Article 2 was on the mission and vision. These are statements that we didn't tweak that you have had. So we're including them in the charter. Questions or comments? Moving on to guiding principles, Article 3. These you had sort of sprinkled throughout a variety of documents, and we're certainly in your heads and hearts the way you wanted to do work. We tried to put them in writing and talk about what the CoC expects of everyone involved. Questions or comments? Okay, Article 4 was a new statement on commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. You've seen this before at a general membership meeting, but any questions or comments at this point? Okay, moving on to Article 5, which is page 10 of the document. Any comments on the goals? These are consistent with HUD standards as they're currently written, but certainly consistent with your behavior as an organization. Okay.
Question about bullet, just the question about bullet B underneath the goals where it says that it's providing funding for the nonprofit. Did that directly come from the HUD language, or is that our adaptation? And I only asked because I never thought of us as providing funding. I thought of us as kind of like securing the funding and then, but I might be overthinking it, and then distributing it. So, yeah.
I think I can't say that that's specific to HUD language. I'd have to look it up and I can check for that. But I do think it's a goal that we've talked about for the CoC to part of the function is to provide the funding by, you know, applying for HUD funding, applying for MISTA funding, applying for other funding, to have the resources we need to prevent and end homelessness. So the COC doesn't exist to provide funding for any one particular entity, but for the work in the community to get the job done. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. All right, Article 6. This is a new section. It talks about specifically a code of conduct statement that all members would be asked to sign each year, a conflict of interest disclosure form. It talks about confidentiality and gift acceptance. So when we're talking about gift acceptance, we're not just talking about somebody donating $1 million painting to us. We're talking about even, you know, soliciting things for events or giveaways or whatever, but being clear about how that can happen and who can do that. It's also possible, and I would say ideal for you to develop more in-depth policies in your policy manual on each of these topics. And I can provide samples of them, but the charter lays the framework. Okay, Article 7. The duties of the COC. Back to Article 7. There we go.
I'm sorry, for some reason, every time I let someone in the room, it advances to the next slide. So I am paying attention. I do apologize.
I can tell you ours is tricky business. So this talks about, again, the duties of the COC, trying to lay those out, laying the framework for the rest of the charter. Any questions or comments there? Okay, Article 8. Here we talk about the eligibility for people to be members of the COC, and we call that group of people the big group, the general membership. So that's trying to formalize that language to mean everybody who attends COC meetings. The meetings are open to the public and free as always. We did try to no, we didn't try. We did specify organizational membership versus individual membership and defined how they're different. We were clear about, I think, participation expectations. That it needs to be monitored in real time, what the sanctions could be if someone doesn't live up to the participation expectations, and what the general membership votes on. And Bill, I saw something in the chat fly by. Go back and see what it was.
Got your comment. So Bill's comment in the chat is that the COC is a catalyst to attract and mobilize federal, state, and local resources, not just housing dollars, for the purpose and clear intent of ending homelessness. It also happens to be federally mandated since the 2013 HERTH Act. And then Cindy has a comment that perhaps Article 5B should say facilitate funding rather than providing. So we will note that. Thank you, Ashley, Bill, and Cindy.
Make a note on my sheet as well.
So, to this section, I find it interesting, right, that there are 3 categories of members, and it makes me wonder, like, do we have individual members right now, and who they might be and what that looks like in terms of voting. So not asking a question, when you ask for comments, that's what came to mind, and I can appreciate this clarity that I never had before.
I think right now, from when I look at the list of people who attend, you have what we would both. People who come because they want to come and other people who come because they're an employee of an organization. one of the key elements of this again was to make sure that it's one vote, one organization, or one vote, one individual person. So an organization can't bring 20 people and all 20 of them vote, for example. So that was sort of the distinction we wanted to make. Anything else on general membership and the categories, the benefits, the expectations? So you'll notice that one of the other new things is a membership form. I just want to make sure this is pointed out. So every year, every person would fill out a simple little form, but it confirms that they again commit to the code of conduct. They disclose any new or existing conflicts or perceived conflicts. If they're an organizational member, they identify who their voting designee and alternates are, so we know who to call on for votes. So that's a new step in the process, and we would be asking the infrastructure organization to manage that. Okay, Article 9. Meetings. I gotta move my chat, it's in the way. I don't think there's any real rocket science here, but we talk about making sure there's a calendar, and we agree to that in advance, and it's posted, and you decide if it's virtual or in person, and you know what the role of the infrastructure organization is with the chair of the CoC. Meetings are be open. The supermajority votes. So the general membership would have to have a 75% affirmative vote to remove a member, to reinstate a member, to dissolve the advisory council if you had one established, to make any charter amendments, to terminate an MOA, I should say, and if you wanted to dissolve the CoC. Those would take at least a 75% vote. Okay.
And the IO, the infrastructure organization, so the IO would be what Metro is right now.
Yeah,
correct?
what's previously been called a lead agency, which we learned isn't really a designation in the HUD regulations. Okay, we'll move on to Article 10. Ashley?
A question about the section we just transitioned from. So there's a caveat in there about open meetings, and it made me think Open Meetings Act, which made me wonder if there's information underneath the Open Meeting Act that we're supposed to share. That's all. Comment, not a question, just a thought that I had from what we just read.
Well, as a collaborative group of agencies, you're not covered by the Open Meetings Act. And this was more to say the meetings will be open. Everybody agree with that I can see? Okay. Jill, is that right? You're my legal expert. That was at least our intent, to make everything transparent. All right, Article 10. The Governance Council. I mean, you have had a group of people that you've called something similar to that, and the same general idea. They're responsible for oversight and leadership and coordinating all the work of the committees. They get nominated by a nominating committee and approved by the general membership. We have added designated, or some organizations call them appointed seats, and some undesignated seats. And then we have some designated non-voting seats for the entities that we contract with, like the IO, the HARO, the HMIS administrator. We articulate their roles and responsibilities. You have now 4 officers instead of 3. We added a second vice chair, one in charge of program, one focused on finance, as well as the chair and secretary. Any other comments on that?
Does it,
Brian.
does it speak to what happens? Oh, underneath under designated seats. That speaks to what happens if we have less than 25 members on the
Um,
governance council.
Well, the undesignated ones are there sort of permanently, and up after that you fill with undesignated seats. So it would be in your best interest to fill any vacancies so that you have the representation that you need and want on the governance council.
Right. I was just trying to make sure I didn't see where that was covered in the charter. And then the second thing is underneath bullet B, where it says the purpose, the governance council works collaboratively. That second line, it should be to provide, just the extra S.
Oh, I'm sorry, where was that?
Article 10. B.
Got it, B, okay, got it. It says under section F that a little bit more about the maximum number of the governance council is 31. So you have 9 designated seats, 3 designated non-voting, and then up to 19 undesignated seats. And there's the section on vacancies explains how many vacancies get filled.
Paula, you have a hand raised.
Yeah, I saw Brian. I was just trying to finish Ashley's comment. Brian?
Thank you. Polly, question regarding under Article 10 on the re-election of the EC. So paragraph D talks about, I believe, the nominations being, including the EC members, being presented to the general membership in January with voting in February, and then their terms beginning March 1. So, and I don't recall when, those are 1-year terms under this charter. Previous charter was 2-year terms. I thought that the current EC was elected sometime earlier this year in the first quarter, I believe. So with this, I mean, would you agree that we are under the gun to get the nominating committee, activated and, prepared to present the slate, next month?
Well, I think that you should talk about the phase-in of the charter. There's a lot of things that need to be prepared before you really can hit the ground running. So if you felt you could do that, that's one option. The other option is to extend the terms of the existing people to a reasonable point in time and then, take a reasoned and intentional approach to nominations.
Would you consider then a paragraph or sentence to be added into this charter that, there's a kind of a inauguration, period, not inauguration, but a unique period for the first enrollment under the new charter? Because now we have an existing charter and we're transitioning to a new one, but you wouldn't have the kind of the steps memorialized in this charter of how that would occur.
We could do that. I just wanted to make a distinction. You kept saying EC, and this is a governance council. There is an executive committee, which is a little bit different. The governance council terms are 3-year terms. The officers are, I think, 1-year terms, but we can certainly put a statement in here about how the inaugural or whatever we want to call it, the initial new governance council will be seated.
Okay.
When it will.
That
So
would
let
be
me make a
terrific.
note to add. Initial GC and executive committee. Okay,
Polly, can I follow up with another question?
sure.
Unrelated to my previous question. So under the designated voting seats on page 26,
Okay,
it calls out the 3 sectors: education, government, and housing. And in the committee's review, as this charter was being prepared and drafted, was there any consideration or benchmarking done to other charters? And do they have, a slot for hospitals or mental health agencies as one of the designated voting seats?
we did look at about 20, 25, maybe different COCs across the country. Some have designated seats, some don't. We include them in the earlier section on who needs to be represented. And And we did talk through as a committee, we had everybody who's currently on it, what sector they represent, and do we have the diversity we need? Are you proposing that we have a designated seat for healthcare in some way?
Well, I was just questioning the rationale for it, and I don't want to call out one designated voting seat from another, but I was just, for instance, weighing the rationale of having a designated seat for the land bank, but not having a designated seat for such a critical role of, mental health and hospitals. That's not to minimize the land bank by any means, but
Right.
I just thought, here we have a collection of agencies that deal with homeless on a daily basis, and they're not equally represented as a voting seat.
Well, they can certainly be on the governance council and be elected, and we would hope that all the sectors will be represented, but I mean, we can take it back to the governance council.
And that's why I've asked if other, benchmark charters, included that, or would we be unique in that sense?
I mean, the communities that had designated seats, and I'd have to pull out my research on that. They were all so different based on their community setup. Like one community that comes to mind, their Department of Health and Human Services in their community was their lead agency, their infrastructure organization, and we don't sort of mention them at all. So it really just depends on what we want to do. Every community was really different. There was no one size fits all that I could find.
Okay, and that makes sense. Every community is different.
But I mean, we did have the conversation about what if one of these goes out of business? Should we even specify the seats, or should we just say 4 entities representing housing? So we did look to the Greater Flint Health Coalition, and they're the way they have designated seats, and they've had them for some time. So it's really up to you guys what you want to do.
Yeah, and please know, I was just throwing it out as a question mark.
Yeah, I mean, I would say you for sure better have them on the governance council because you're gonna need them.
And just for context, we had the same conversation around law enforcement and workforce agencies. So we spent quite a bit of time on that piece right there, who's designated or undesignated.
And, I've worked with organizations that have both, and there are pros and cons, and we had some debate on the pros and cons of even having them. So you may discover this doesn't work for you, or you may discover it does. It's just, I guess, where do you want to start?
Okay.
So
I'm sorry, you have a hand from Ashley also.
Oh, I can see the hand.
And we got a lot of more articles to go through, so.
Okay, Ashley.
Yeah, I lower my hand.
Oh, you can ask your question. Oh, you're muted.
More so on the commenting, so I'll try to minimize moving forward. But when I'm looking at J, the terms for the governance council, it makes me wonder what the guidance is around individuals who don't stay for the duration of their entire 3-year term. So if you stay 3 years, you have to take a year off before you can do another 3 years. But what if I stay 1 year of my first term of the 3 years and then I leave? Should I come back to the governance council? Do I get to finish up my next 2 years as a term and still have those other potential 6 years and 3-year increments available? Or is that not an option? Just a thought I had.
I suppose it would be an option. And just to clarify, all governance council members are eligible for 2 3-year terms consecutively before they have to take a 1 year off. So you don't have to take your year off after your first 3, but after 6, you do. So I think if you were elected for a 3-year term, the expectation is that you would serve those 3 years. And if you didn't, I think people would wonder, like, did you change jobs? Were you not committed? I mean, the nominating committee would have to weigh that. But if they proposed you again, I guess you guys would have to decide if that first year served counted against you. I wouldn't think so, but it will be up to you the way you interpret it.
Since-
So I just wanted to respond back to Bill and Brian's comments and just maybe also offer that there is a matrix that we have that has all of the sectors identified. And we may want to include that as part of the, as an appendix that shows healthcare, shows law enforcement, shows workforce. And it might be a good resource because it shows those 9 designated seats, as well as also shows I won't say the breakdown, but it shows those other sectors that should be represented. So it may make sense to do that. I think in the previous charter, it lists all of those sectors either in a paragraph or a bulleted list. So somehow we may want to capture that as well. So whoever is next knows what they should be looking for to make sure that we have good representation across the board.
We could repeat it because we have it in the section for general membership, and maybe we want to include it here for the governance council as well. So I can do that.
And then Bill, he also had a comment about considering 2-year staggered terms for officers because 1-year terms would not be supportive of maintaining consistency in developing CoC leadership. So that's a good point for consideration.
And we did go around that as well. So that's up to you guys. 2-year terms. I had a thought, but I forgot it. So if I think of it, I'll bring it up again. All right, the advisory council. Again, this is something that is optional. I don't think the governance work group is proposing that you necessarily move ahead with this now. It's an option. The charter just provides a structure for it. And you have had conversation over the years, as I understand it, about making sure, I mean, we really want homelessness to be on everybody's agenda in the community. And for those of you who work in it every day, you get it, but is there an advisory council that would help us put it on other people's agenda? Or if they weren't able to commit to being on the governance council or an active general member, is that a way to get other participants, maybe from completely different sectors? But so this is available to you if you want to do it. Any questions or comments about the advisory council article? All right, moving on to the independent review team. This is new to the Flint and Genesee County. I stole the language from somebody else, another CoC, but several communities have a similar entity. And the idea is to have as independent of a small group as we can, who is well-educated, well-informed, works well together, has the expertise and skills that are needed for this work to help with both funding prioritization and ranking of proposals, as well as performance evaluation. They are involved. I'm sorry, I should have had that on the slide. I thought I did. In the charter, they are required to evaluate the governance council at least annually. And they have roles in looking at all the HARA, the HMIS, and the infrastructure organization as well. They don't have a final vote on anything, but they do analysis, review, and make recommendations. Any thoughts about the IRT? This is another one of those things that will require some implementation work because you need to identify these people. I mean, as you work out a timeline, and we have a couple draft timelines, but to next year's NOFO, when do you have to have these people in place? Who's going to commit to do it? How do you make sure they're independent? Are they educated, et cetera? So this has some phase up time, ramp up time. Okay, moving on to the next one, Article 13. Role of the infrastructure organization. As we talked through what an infrastructure organization would be and what we wanted the lead agency to be, or generically speaking, in an ideal world, we kept coming up with the idea that it was like a backbone organization. It really enabled all the parts to do what they need to do. So we're choosing the language infrastructure organization, or IO, to describe this. So if you've read it, you know that there's all of these things are included in the article. Are there any questions or comments on the IO? Okay. This is also the first time we see in the charter the RFP process and the memorandum of agreement, but it will be in all the coming up articles as well. Okay. Article 14, the collaborative applicant. So I am not a content expert on this part, so I might get this a little confused, but every year the community, the collaborative, can determine if it's going to have a single collaborative applicant or not. And if you do, this describes what a collaborative applicant could be, as well as what HUD requires. And it can be bigger than what the HUD definition is. Bill, I see your hand.
And thank you for letting me join the discussion, and good evening to all you folks. Good afternoon. HUD would prefer to see a collaborative or consolidated applicant. That is very clear in their discussion. They don't want to see a bunch of different applications coming in. The whole point of the CoC from their standpoint is to reinforce the need for a collaborative applicant to submit a CoC, an application on behalf of the entire CoC. So that is something we need to work on. That should be our goal as to how we implement this structure to make this happen. I know we've had a lot of discussion these past few months about how this is going to happen in terms of whether or not we're going to have a lead agency or whatever other interesting terms we want to call it. But I think at the same time, the idea there is very, very clearly HUD wants to see us put together a collaborative application, not just the application itself, that's the tip of the iceberg, but a collaborative process. Okay, you'll see a comment I made in the chat box about this, the way I think this needs to, with the way we need to conceptualize this. Thank you for allowing me my 2 cents worth in soapboxing a bit in here.
Of course.
So I just want to share that the reason that collaborative applicant and infrastructure organization are 2 separate articles is because those can be the same agency. They don't have to be the same agency. So there very well could be an MOA that just covers both a collaborative applicant and infrastructure organization together. And so we also just wanted to leave the option that if there was a different route that the CoC wanted to take, where there's an agency that is responsible for completing and submitting the HUD application as a collaborative applicant, but is not necessarily interested in being the infrastructure organization and providing that day-to-day oversight and support of the CoC, that we have that flexibility and option, not necessarily that that was the intention to do that. So I just wanted to point that out. And then Bill, I think that, you know, you're very much on target, and we have had many conversations about permanent supportive housing and about how healthcare plays a role in that process. So I don't think that anything that is discussed in the charter prevents us from doing that. A lot of that work should be a part of our strategic plan in terms of how those funds are actually allocated and which initiatives we want to, which initiatives we would want to pursue and how aggressively we would want to pursue those.
Right. Our objective here was, it doesn't says to really just clarify the roles and responsibilities of every sort of major piece of the puzzle.
And then Jim Perlacki had a question. If they are different, should the IRT also be responsible for evaluating that group annually as well? And I do believe we have that covered in bullet G under performance evaluation.
We have it for the collaborative applicant under what is now H. It might have been a G at one point, that the collaborative applicant will be assessed by the IRT and the governance council. It doesn't say annually, but we could say that if you want. Part of what you've really got to think about this IRT, might be one of the things as you work with this, you'll figure out what works best, but we intentionally kept it to a relatively small group of people. And you're going to be asking them to do a lot of work. And because they're independent, this is not their real world all the time, right? And so this is going to be an add-on to the jobs that they do, whatever their other jobs are. So how much can you ask them to do? You'll just have to weigh that out and see how it works, but I think it's going to be a lot of work for a small group of people. Okay, moving on to Article 15. The role of the HMIS administrator. Our goal was that most of these sections would sort of mirror each other throughout for the major contracted entities. This one I think is fairly straightforward in terms of their role. It's spelled out pretty well by HUD. Selected in the same way as the others. Performance also assessed by the IRT and the governance council. Any questions or comments on this article? Article 16, the HARA. Same basic layout and structure. Oh, hopefully. Any comments or questions about the HARA? All right. Article 17. We know that there's a work group working diligently on coordinated entry policies and procedures. So the sections that we put in the charter are sort of just to describe that is the process. It's not intended to be the policy or the practice. So hopefully this is consistent with what we come up with, but this is pretty much what HUD and MISHDA seem to require. Any questions or comments about that coordinated entry? All right, committees. This section was, we talked about the different committees at a general membership meeting at least once. We tried to combine some of the work and some of the people that were working on the different things into committees that maybe had slightly bigger umbrellas, but unfortunately for y'all, the work is still immense and it's still the same amount of work. We just tried to make it as effective and as efficient as we could with committees and to formalize what committees are expected to do by creating work plans and presenting those to the full membership and then an annual report and also presenting that as well. It also is a vehicle for you to use to engage other people who aren't currently involved very much either in the general membership or just in the community to participate. It would be really helpful to get more people who are experiencing or have experienced homelessness on committees. So opportunities are there. Any questions or comments about the committees? Okay, Article 19 is the CoC programs. You had this in a previous document and we carried over most of the language for what the expectations are, how a CoC program could be removed, and how you would replace that entity if you needed to. Any comments on that? Moving on to Article 20, which is just a few important but miscellaneous things. One is your operating year, is January 1st. You can change that to some other date, whatever you want it to be, but we sort of use that to base the rest of the calendar off of. That the governance council has to review the charter at least on an annual basis and propose recommendations of change to the general membership, who has to have a 75% affirmative vote to make changes. And that the requests for support is one thing that the governance council has authority to do. I guess without the general membership vote. When an agency requests a letter of support, the governance council can choose to issue that. Clearly, if they had questions or thought it was wise to go to the general membership, and that would be part of the governance committee's decision-making process. Other than that, we're into the appendices, well, definitions. And then the appendices are examples of documents that you may assign a committee to make yours, but there's a sample membership form, a way to keep a record of the charter amendments, which the charter currently requires you to do. So that attached to the charter is always a cumulative list of amendments made, and we stole this from the Detroit CoC. Actually, they do a great job of recording their changes. Some organizational governance policies, you wouldn't put them in the charter, but you might have a table of contents and refer people to a governance manual of some sort, but you could spell out a number of things in greater detail. And some examples of policies are listed there, but there are many more. And then a glossary of terms, especially for people who are new to this, or are really intensely involved in one piece of the pie, but need to understand the whole pie sometimes. So that's the work of the charter at this point. There is this process now, once you're ready to vote on it and adopt it, of implementing it. And I think the governance work group will talk tomorrow some more about how you actually lay this out, because you aren't perfectly ready to go right now, but you can get there. So what kind of phase-in period do you want to have? Do you want to say, let's make this effective in 6 months, 2 months, whatever? There's some additional policies that you're going to want to do fairly soon that may not have to be ready before you start, but the committee structures would need to be realigned. Probably have the right people, but officially name co-chairs, get some work plans in place. The governance council has to assign its terms in a staggered way. If you want to get ready for an RFP and an MOA, those take time, and we do have a draft policy that we worked on. and a sample MOA, but that will take some time. And then we have a draft annual calendar ready. The committee manual is almost done. So you'll be ready to go soon, once you decide that this is the charter and the structure and the everything you want to guide the work. Questions or comments? And this is what it would look like. And we also sent you out, I believe, a one pager that's sort of an at a glance chart of the size of each of these elements and sort of the role of responsibility, etc.
I appreciate the cleanliness of the layout. I can only imagine what kind of lift this had to be. You talked about there being a heavy ask of that IRT, but I think major shout out to the governance council and Polly, to your team, for being able to push out a tangible document that clearly outlines some things that I think many of us have had questions about. So kudos to you all, and thank you for doing the work.
Well, thank you. And I can tell that you read it, and I'm greatly appreciative of that. I mean, we had to read it.
I will echo those same sentiments. It's a lot of work here that's done here, but it sets the stage. At least now we have some areas we can move forward on. Like I said, there's still some refining. There's always room for improvement, but the basic structure is in place. Thank you to you folks. And again, I want to come back and say this, the CoC is not a public agency where we're subject to the Open Meetings Act or anything else like that. We choose to do this because this is the way we feel about our organization. That's what this is all about. And I think that shows in the work that we're doing right now. And again, I admire all of you folks for the work that you've done to pull all of this together. Excellent work here. It's a real dedication, considering that you all have other jobs to do. Wahoo. Excellent work.
Well, thank you so much to all of you. The work group has been phenomenal, and they know a lot. And you guys have the best hearts of any community group I know.
So if I could just recap what I heard, right? On Article 5, we have a suggested revision in Section B talking about facilitating versus providing funding.
yes.
Then when it came to the governance council, some type of clause about the inaugural group and term lines, we might want to consider that. And then also including the matrix as part of that appendix so that people are able to see those agencies. And that's an already completed work, Bill, just so you know, we use that matrix when we have vacancies. And so that has not been modified. So that can just be attached to this policy. And then were there any other revisions or changes that we need to consider prior to walking this to the CLC on Wednesday?
So I think Jim's point about the collaborative applicant being annual review. So just making sure that that language is included. Ashley noted that there were some minor grammatical errors. So Ashley, if you could send those to Polly, we can get those cleaned up. If you have them outlined, that would be fantastic. And
Do you want to make?
Did we, and then we need to resolve, I don't know if you mentioned this one, Angela, the terms for officers.
And I was just going to bring that up.
You know, we talked about it a lot. So it's really, again, pros and cons to both. There's no term limit. So if someone did a great job for a year, you could certainly reappoint them. I don't think there was a term limit until their term as a governance council member expires. But there was a balance between, can you get someone to commit for a 2-year term? It's a lot of work. And what if they're not doing their job? So it could go either way. I have a question about the annual review too, before you leave that.
Go ahead.
Oh, do you want the IRT to annually evaluate all the entities, the HARA, the HMIS, the IO, and the collaborative applicant, as well as the governance council? Annual, okay. Make them all annual.
And there is a standard APR process that takes place for HUD funded entities. And it makes sense that that would be a regular process for those major vital organizations as well.
Okay,
Yeah, and I think the thing to keep in mind is I think what we were trying to achieve is another group of folks that could administer the tool and synthesize the information so that it wouldn't be, the infrastructure organization reviewing themselves, right, essentially, or being able to, there was someone else that could do that process. Same thing with it being the GC or any of those other agencies, that it would be more independent and less, and more objective. And hopefully we can get some good tools so it makes it easy for them to do that as an online survey, which, we'll pull in those charts and graphs and stuff like that for them.
and one of the commitments I hope was stated clearly enough in there is that the IRT will do that objective analysis and make recommendations to the GC. The GC will comment on it, but both what the IRT said and what the GC comments will go to the general membership. So the GC can't bury what the IRT does. And the IRT gets a little bit of a review by people who are more, a broader group of people who are maybe more content experts as well, so that the general membership has the benefit of both.
Checks, balances, and transparency. I love it.
We hope we got it.
Any other thoughts, concerns, or questions? We're approaching the final stretch here, folks. Any thoughts or concerns? Thank
And
you,
please-
Linda.
If you read it and you see something, tell me. I've looked at the document so often, I'm seeing what I expect to see, and it might not be what's there. So, Ashley, I would appreciate any copy editing you can do, or anybody.
Want me to highlight what should be changed, or just make the changes and highlight where I made them?
Highlight what should be changed so I can keep my paper trail going. Thank you kindly. I'll turn it over to you, Essence.
Okay, so with that being said, it has been a great hour together. Thank you to all those who have read the document, who provided feedback. And as Polly said, if you didn't feel comfortable or you think of something later, feel free to send that to Polly. It is our intention to bring this to the CoC for vote on Wednesday. We will send out the recording from today's session along with all of the other sessions. So in case there's anybody that needs to see it or review it, they have one final opportunity, but we would like to bring it before the membership on Wednesday. And I think Polly mentioned it, that it's not 100% perfect, and we may find out in 3 months or 4 months that, hey, we thought it could go this way and we need to change something, and that's okay. I think that the opportunity is there. We would just have to follow the process outlined in the charter to make those changes. But we're definitely open to that, because this is much more robust than we thought we would have when we started this. But I am grateful to Polly for pushing back and encouraging us to, look a little bit deeper, to look at 25 CoCs across the country and see how they're doing it. And I just want to make sure that you guys understand too, that there are some CoCs where there is a board, and that board governs everything having to do with the CoC, and there's not that community involvement. And I think that there were some folks that thought, hey, that would make everything easier. And yes, maybe it would in a lot of ways, but we also respect the work that all of the folks on this call and all of the folks that are a part of the CoC have done over the last, 20 plus years. And we did not want to create a scenario where we lost community voice and community input and community power to, make changes, make adjustments, make suggestions, recommendations. And that's why a lot of things you see, there may be a recommendation from the IRT or from governance or from the EC, but it all comes back to the community for vote. And that was something that was extremely, extremely important to us and also to the membership. So just wanted to point those things out and just say thank you again. If you need to go back and watch something, the recording will be sent out to you either this evening or tomorrow morning. We look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Some of you I'll see tomorrow as well, but for the GC meeting, but definitely on Wednesday for the CLC meeting. So thanks for participating. We appreciate you guys.